Good morning, and welcome to CBIA's 2019 Safety and Health Conference. On behalf of CBIA and our sponsors, Cardiac Science and Aware Recovery, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. I would also like to express our thanks to our vendors, GZA Environmental, Field Safety Corporation, Safari, My Value Tree, Safety Priority Consultants, and Concept. Each vendor has a display booth, and we urge you to take the time to stop and chat with them throughout the day. A special thank you also goes to ASSP, the American Society of Safety Professionals. We have with us today Ed Zimmer, the local chapter president. Ed, if you could stand for a moment. Ed has offered to share with you throughout the day any thoughts, any interest you may have in becoming a member or get involved in the chapter. Ed would love to hear from you. Thank you, Ed. We have an interesting and exciting day planned for you, and hopefully by the time 4 o'clock comes around, you'll be a more informed safety professional. A quick note before I forget, we'll have a couple of raffles throughout the day, one at lunchtime when you'll get a chance to win a portal from Facebook, and another at the end of the day where you'll get another chance to win another Facebook portal, as well as a special prize offered by Safari. Before we begin today's presentation, there are two things I'd like to mention. First, as safety professionals, you'll be happy to hear this. If there is an emergency, we will exit through these doors and convene at the main entrance. If that's not available, we'll exit through this entrance, or exit rather, and still convene at the main entrance. Secondly, I would like to express CBIA's deep gratitude to the members of our advisory board. These are the individuals, the CBIA members, who have helped us put this conference together. They are, and if they could stand as I call their name, Marko Kaar of Bartlett, Burnett, and Ecot, Michael Ferry of O&G Industries, John Beatty of J-Pro, Sherry Helgett of Seacoast and Company. I know Sherry's in here, I saw her, okay. Chris Main of GZA Environmental. Now Chris is here also, he may be setting up. Mark Haskins of Practical Safety Solutions. Melissa Noyes of Comatics, and Chip Darius of Safety Priority Consultants. I'd like to thank all these individuals who have helped us plan this day. Thank you very much. Two quick logistical items before I forget. We do offer you the opportunity to get your headshots taken. We have a professional photographer just across the hall. He'll be here until around 12 o'clock. So if you'd like to update your Facebook page or whatever the case may be, if you'd like to get a headshot taken, please. Again, the room is just across the hall. We've had a change in our lineup. Our keynote speakers from OSHA are running a little bit late. They got caught up in the Boston traffic. So we're going to switch things around. We're going to have our panelists who will be talking about the addiction issues speak first, and then we are guessing that our OSHA and con-OSHA speakers will be here by then. Thank you for your patience. I must admit, when the advisory committee first suggested the topic of addiction and fitness for duty, I was a little bit surprised. I didn't exactly see it in the context of safety. However, the more I read about it, the more I realized the impact this issue is having on our workforce. Companies have found simply saying we are drug-free isn't enough in attacking this complex problem. We are fortunate today to have a panel of experts who will share with us some of the strategies companies like yourself and your workers can use in addressing the addiction issue or fitness for duty in the workplace. Leading our panel is Marko, Kaar. Marko has been involved in safety since 1989, and in his current role as Director of Safety Operations, is responsible for implementation and oversight of all BBE's safety activities. Marko will introduce our panelists. However, they are Robert Brody, Eric Daigle, Beth Dupont, Shelley Halligan, Tom Matthews, and Kyle Zimmer. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Are we all live now, Pete?
Should have brought sunglasses.
Oh, those lights are bright.
Yeah, I feel like I'm on stage.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Yay, it's Friday.
Yay.
As Phillip indicated, my name is Marko Kaar. I am the Director of Safety Operations for a company called Bartlett Brainerd Ecot in Bloomfield, Connecticut. We are a general contractor and construction manager. We do everything from residential construction to commercial construction, industrial, et cetera. I have an esteemed panel with me today: Beth Dupont from ONG Industries, Shelley Halligan from Aware Recovery Care, Eric Daigle from Laz Parking, Bob Brody from Brody and Associates, and Tom Matthews. We have spent the past 2 months or so, month and a half or so, putting this program together. It will run absolutely perfectly. There will be no glitches. There will be no mistakes, and we won't speak over each other. I promise you that.
What'd you say?
Yeah. This is intended to be an interactive program. We absolutely do not have the answers here. I think we will raise more questions than we will have answers for you. And that's where I hope that we get your involvement as we go through this program. Any questions that you have, stop us as we're going through it. We have our canned presentation, but we want to make sure that we answer the questions that you came to this program with. Let me get started by asking a couple of questions, and I'm going to step off the stage. I feel separated from everybody up there. How many company owners do we have in the audience? Raise your hands. Any owners? Presidents, CEOs? Raise your hands. Okay. HR folks, raise your hands. Excellent. Safety people, raise your hands. Okay. So it's a safety conference, a lot of safety people. One of the questions that comes up is, and Phillip had indicated this concern or this question as well, is why are we talking about alcoholism, addiction, opioids, et cetera, as it relates to safety? How does this all get interplayed? Why is it intertwined? Why do we need to be concerned about listening to NPR on the way to a safety conference? And there's invariably a story. Every morning, there's a story about the opioid crisis. That's kind of the ticket to entry to today's program. We're going to talk a little bit about the opioid crisis. We're going to talk a little bit about addiction as it relates to other types of addiction. But it's really the behaviors that we have to recognize that get brought into the workplace that now start to affect the behaviors of our people, the people that are working for us and around us. The goal, if you look here, the synopsis of the program is what are the issues that we have and what are some suggestions that we can put into play. Bob Brody from Brody and Associates is kind of our adult in the room. He's the counsel for the staff on today's program, and he's going to be talking to us a lot about, okay, rein it back in, Marko. Just chill out a little bit, relax a little bit, and let's talk about the legal application, the legal concerns associated with this wanting to do something. And you know, as safety folks, we get tied into this wanting to do something. That's in our blood. It's in our DNA. We have to do something. We have to keep people safe. We have to do the right thing, but we have to do it the right way. And the tough part with this conversation, I think, is that for most of us in the safety industry, we've been doing it long enough where we can pretty much quote chapter and verse where it says we have to do something. You know, there's an OSHA regulation, and this is why we have to follow that OSHA regulation. And then for those of us that have gone beyond compliance and we're up into best practices, we're still founded on compliance. We're founded on compliance with our safety programs. It's a little bit out there now, you know, with this conversation about addiction and mental health and whatnot. We're kind of treading on thin ice. We don't have the black and white of the OSHA regulations to rely on so much. So we have to look at it from an enthusiastic perspective. We have to look at it from a legal perspective, and hopefully this group will bring that to light with us. Make sure this all works out okay. Bartlett Brainerd Ecot. Again, I work for a construction company. How many construction companies in the room? Okay, so maybe 10 or 15%. General industry, manufacturing. Okay. Service companies. Okay, combinations of all of the above. Great, so now we know who we're talking to for the most part. I'm here to basically lay the groundwork, to talk about why we're here, and then the panel will kind of inform us as we go through the program as to what we can do. Now, the slide has two different components for addiction to illicit drugs and prescription drugs, and you see that they're both the same. We have to be concerned about illicit drug use in the workplace. We have to be concerned about the use of opioids. We have to be concerned about the use of marijuana. We have to be concerned about the use of alcohol. But then there's the legal application too, the legal use of these drugs. What do we do about somebody who's taking too much cough syrup? What do we do about somebody who's on medical marijuana? Is anybody else here kind of freaking out about the potential for legalization of marijuana in the state of Connecticut? Raise your hands, everybody, pretty much. It's a scary thought. How in the world are we going to police this? How are we going to deal with this in the workplace? And that's where Bob's going to give us all the answers today, I think, right?
Yeah, right.
All the answers. You look at the behaviors associated with the uses of drugs and alcohol, the overuse, if you will, or the misuse of drugs and alcohol that bring themselves into the workplace. Sometimes we don't, we're concerned when we're in the workplace. Bob and I were talking about this. We're focused on the work that's going on and the workers that are working around us. And we have controls in place that govern those behaviors in the workplace. We have SOPs, procedures that we have to follow. But what about somebody who comes into the workplace with challenges behind them? They may not be drinking now. They may not be high now. But what behavior have they brought in with them? What do we have to worry about? These are things that we have to ask ourselves, and goodness gracious, I wish I had the answers. Alcoholism, gambling is an addiction, porn is an addiction. We hear about all of these different types of addictions, and what do these behaviors bring to the workplace? Is there presenteeism in the workplace, where somebody's on their computer, they should be presenting a report, they should be putting together a program, they should be developing their SOP, and they're on the computer and they're on a gaming site, or they're on a porn site. How do we recognize this, and how do we address it? And we have to look at it from the perspective of addiction is a disease, and it's something that we all deal with. We've all dealt with in some way, shape, or form. I guarantee you that every single person in this room is touched by addiction in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps not personally, but you know somebody, or you're familiar with somebody, or you've heard about somebody. You've heard about somebody who died in a car crash because of a drunk driver. That's a relationship to addiction. That's something that we all have to recognize as a society is a challenge for us. Some statistics. National Safety Council did a study. It was released back in March, and I know the numbers are kind of small. I think you all have handouts to follow along. I just want to point out some key points on these next few slides. 75% were indicated in this study by the National Safety Council were touched in some way by opioids, the opioid crisis. It may be that you're in the HR department and you're working with folks who have a problem. They presented themselves to you. God bless them for being able to do that. They presented themselves to you and said, I think I have a problem. I need some help. Can you put me in touch with the EAP? Can you give me some phone numbers to call? Can you put me in line with a recovery program? I need help. 75% of all people in the workplace, as a result, as part of this study, have shown that there's some relationship with opioids in the workplace. That's a scary number. 38% have experienced absenteeism or impaired worker performance, and then 31% had some type of a near miss. And correct me if I'm wrong, but near misses don't always go reported, do they? You know, define a near miss. When you see something happen, you see the videos on YouTube or LinkedIn or whatever, and there's all these crazy things, and oh, nobody got hurt. Yeah, well, the crane still tipped over. The truck still rolled down the embankment. The forklift still flipped over. That's not a near miss. If there's damage to equipment, it's still an incident that needs to be investigated. And what caused that? How did we get to that point that somebody was actually able to roll a truck over, was actually able to drive a forklift into a bollard? That's why we have bollards in the warehouse, right? So that the forklifts don't go and hit the shelving units. Is it a near miss if you hit the bollard? Or is that just a protective measure? Is that like a guardrail on a job site? If you fall against the guardrail on a job site, is that a near miss? Is there a slip, trip, and fall that brought us to that point? Perhaps. So when you look at the numbers, at least as a result of this study, there's a lot of impact in our workplaces with opioids particularly. And again, opioids are, you know, what everybody's talking about. There are stories, again, every day on NPR, every day on the Channel 8 News, there's always something that's going on. Somebody's being arrested for an opioid whatever. The first responders have been exposed to fentanyl because of a drug bust that they did. I thought this was an interesting slide, and you know how this works. You can kind of make the numbers say whatever you want them to say. And I saw this one and I said, I wonder where all that light green is coming from. The light green is saying that basically the respondents to this questionnaire said that we are somewhat well prepared. Thanks, Walter. Yeah, that's what I did too. I kind of laughed. We're somewhat well prepared. So I guess the question is who answered the question? If it's a study by the National Safety Council, one could assume that it's primarily folks from the safety side of the industry that are answering these questions. So when you ask me, are you prepared to deal with opioids in the workplace? I could say, yeah, pretty much, but that's an HR problem. So that 53% of respondents who say, yeah, we're somewhat prepared, I think, let's be honest with each other, it's probably a lack of information, and it's a lack of really wanting to ask the hard questions, and it's all of us wanting to look on the bright side of the situation and say, yeah, we have a plan for that. Yeah, we're good with that. Well, we don't have a problem per se, so we don't need to have a plan. Is that kind of fair to say? I see some heads nodding as we go through this. So the goal, and I'll show you a slide later on too, we're going to take that, our goal is to take that somewhat well prepared and broaden that, but push it towards the positive side. You see the dark red is extremely unprepared. Those are the honest people. You know? What do you think that number actually is? 20, 25%? You know, you don't have to raise your hands on this one, but if you were to ask yourself, are you prepared? Where would you fall in this realm? Just ask yourselves. I thought this was an interesting slide, talking about the confidence of our ability to respond to opioids in the workplace. The appropriate HR policies to deal with this issue. 50% of the respondents said yes because they were safety people, not HR people, most likely. Sure, we're prepared because HR's got it under control. I know that there are many of us who wear double hats, right? We're a safety person and the de facto HR person because you're involved with people and you do all that soft, squishy stuff, so you might as well be HR as well? Okay. Been there, done that. I know what we're talking about. And then down to workers can identify warning signs. This is where people got a little bit more honest, I think, and said, wow, 32% said we're not prepared because we don't know. We don't know what the issues are. We're not quite sure how opioid addiction or misuse or abuse of opioids, and again, the focus is on opioids in this questionnaire. I would submit to you that the question and answer could be very similar for any other type of addiction. We're not sure how it presents itself. We're not sure how an alcoholic presents themselves. They may have had their fill last night. They may have reached their legal blood alcohol content and showed up for work today and they're quote unquote sober. But what are they thinking in the back of their minds? Where's the next one? When's the next one coming? If you're an alcoholic and you drank to the point of reaching your legal blood alcohol content last night, I guarantee you the thought the next morning is, where am I going after work? Where am I stopping after work? What do I have home? What do I have hidden? What do I have in the car? What do I have in the dresser? That's a thought process that's going on, and is that a distraction to that individual? That's something we have to recognize. And where I come from a safety perspective and from a construction perspective, our rate of abuse of alcohol and drugs is twice the national average. So we really have to be focused about it. Anybody here from the construction industry, we really need to be thinking about this, because if our exposure is twice the national average, then it's possible that twice as many people are distracted in some way, shape, or form by their addiction throughout the course of the day. And we all know there's that kind of 10% rule. 10% don't get it, 80% can fluctuate either up or down, and then 10% always get it. There's kind of a bell curve that relates to pretty much any program we put into place. If you're suffering from twice the national average of addiction in your workplace, that 10% of just don't get it goes to 20%. That's a challenge. National overdose deaths have risen 10% since 2016. The numbers keep going up. The top white graph line is males versus females. Our rate is increasing at a higher rate than it is for females. In the state of Connecticut, we had a tremendous increase as well, higher than the national average increase. The numbers just keep going up. And this is opioids. This is, the numbers that we're hearing, the numbers that we're seeing. These are the stories that are on the news. And then you start thinking, okay, I think I may have some individuals in the workplace who are challenged from an addiction perspective. Not quite sure, but there's that one person that I've got questions about. Now let me ask you to open your minds a little bit more, no pun intended, but open your minds a little bit more to the concept of mental health overall in the workplace. What about diagnosed illnesses? PTSD, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, etc. Many of us, and I said pretty much all of us, have a relationship to addiction in some way, shape, or form. I would say that many of us have a similar relationship to mental health as well, whether it's your kids. Think about, anybody here have high school age kids? Okay. It's a time for a lot of change. It's a time for the potential for depression to sit in as their peers excel beyond their abilities, as drugs and alcohol become a challenge in the workplace, as girls and boys and relationships change. All of that affects the mental stability of the student or the student athlete. Those are things we need to think about. And some of you may have already gone through that process. Maybe some of you are looking forward to that process. God bless you as it comes. There are lots of folks that have mental health issues. Fully 1/4 of the United States, statistically, if you look at the numbers, 1/4 of the population of the United States suffers some type of mental health challenge. Only about half of the people who have a mental health challenge seek treatment. And the numbers vary tremendously. That's an average number, 1/2 seek treatment. But when you look at the demographics, when you look at folks coming from poor counties, when you look at folks in the inner city, the numbers change tremendously. It can be 90% don't get help, depending on where you are and where you live and how you work and what the workplace is like. I think, let's not make any assumptions. But you could assume that certain living conditions are going to bring more challenges. Is that fair to say? Certain working conditions bring more challenges. I know Kyle's going to have something to say about this when we start talking about construction and peer groups in the workplace. Who are we working alongside? Think about guys and girls that are traveling for work. How long are they gone? What support systems are they away from as they're gone for that period of time? And then there's the question of overlap of mental health and addiction and how it plays into the other numbers that are out there. Workplace violence, we're hearing more and more stories about that. We're hearing stories about violence in schools. We're hearing about suicide. Another interesting tidbit from a construction perspective, it's sobering and it's horrifying, is that our rate of suicide in the construction industry is 4 times the national average. If you pay attention to Blue Lives Matter. Blue Lives Matter absolutely from the perspective of violence out in the streets. But Blue Lives Matter is also about EMS folks taking their own lives. Rates of suicide on the EMS side are very high. People coming back from overseas, from operation in the services, anybody in the Army, the Navy, etc., come with an increased risk of suicide. Suicide numbers are ugly. For every suicide, there are 25 attempts. It's the 10th leading cause of death. It costs $51 billion to the United States economy. And that's the numbers that somebody's actually been able to put onto paper. Think about the other effects of a suicide in the workplace, especially if it happens in the workplace. But if it's a friend or a colleague that you work with and one of their loved ones has committed suicide, that changes everything. It changes the entire complexion of that family and their surrounding people that they're familiar with, their loved ones. So you take all this and you put it all together and you say, wow, I haven't really thought too much about this, but this affects fitness for duty, does it not? If people are coming with a struggle, some type of struggle, whether it's an immediate, acute exposure to alcohol in the workplace, which means they're drunk. If they're showing up drunk, that's a challenge. I need to be able to assess that. I need to be able to do a fitness for duty check and make sure that they can do what they're supposed to be doing without putting anybody else or any of the work processes at risk. Shelley's going to talk to us about that, about the formal process of doing a fitness for duty check. What's the simplest way to do a fitness for duty check? Anybody know? Thoughts? Anybody do a daily huddle? First thing in the morning, you get your groups together and they talk to each other and they say, here's what we're going to do today. Here's the exposures that we have. Here's the controls that we're going to implement. We do a daily JHA or job hazard analysis or a task hazard analysis or something like that. Is that an opportunity to do a really quick fitness for duty check? Absolutely. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take a lot of effort. But what it takes is that knowledge in the back of your mind going, what happened last night that these personnel are bringing to the table today? Last year, I believe it was, Kyle and Tom were involved in the symposiums with the Connecticut Department of Health. And they participated and presented on the subject of opioids in the workplace. And the DPH came out with a guidance document, I believe it was in November of last year. They came up with 5 key suggestions. They said, if you're really concerned about opioids in the workplace, and I would submit to you that it's not just opioids, it's mental health overall. But what they spoke to was opioids. The first thing you need to do is have instant support. You need to be able to provide counseling. And we're going to talk with some of our professionals here about what that means actually. But one of the key things is be prepared to have a support system in place so that you can respond immediately. Be flexible in terms of light duty, return to work. daycare programs, et cetera. Be flexible in recognizing the challenges that people are bringing to the workplace and what you can do to accommodate them. I had a woman stop me last July, I think it was June it was, we did the OSHA conference up in Amherst. And she said, you know what, we do everything already anyway. We're doing so much right now to accommodate our workers. How much more do we have to do? Why are we talking about this? We've got an EAP. Isn't that enough? I guess we need to think about this and we need to talk about this some more. Regular review of progress toward recovery. So that means somebody's actually paying attention. Not only are we identifying the problem, but we're helping to implement a solution, and we're going back and we're checking to make sure that our solution is appropriate, and then we're reconfiguring as necessary. Does that sound like a safety program? Identify the risk, control the risk, make sure that our controls are working properly. It's the same concept, except now we're talking about mental health versus guardrails. Enlisting success. This is the goal of this presentation today, is to take a half a dozen of us or so who are not necessarily experts as much as we are involved in the process, and we're talking about, some of the potential answers to the questions that we have. Gaining the assistance of people in the process. We're supposed to be the experts, that's why we're up here and you're down there, I guess. I don't know how that works. But who is an expert as it relates to addiction? An addicted person, somebody who's in recovery. Who can speak the most about what it takes and what you have to go through to get through recovery, to be a participating employee in the entire process that you have in your workplace? An addict. So now we have to go to where the problem is and we have to say, I need your help. Trust me, that empowerment of that individual is worth its weight in gold, if you can find those individuals to participate in your programs. So we're going to talk about success. Shelley's going to talk to us about fitness for duty. Bob is going to talk about the legal aspects of this. I changed it up a little bit. The review process is supposed to be review of recovery, but for purposes of this discussion, it's review of your programs and policies and procedures to make sure that you're set up for success, that you can do what needs to be done to manage this challenge. So that's what Bob is going to talk to us about. Let me back up. Make sure I cover everybody. Beth and Eric are going to talk about employer flexibility, what some of the things are that O&G and LAS have done to accommodate their employees to make sure that they're able to function in the workplace and that they're identifying challenges that they may have. Instant support, Tom is going to talk to us about EAP programs and how those are designed and how they work. And then Kyle is going to talk to us about peer programs, peer outreach programs and peer consulting programs. Each one of us has a great deal of experience that we're going to try to share with you as we go through the program today. Oh, I went backwards, so let me go forwards. There we go. All right, Shelley, you're up.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shelley Halligan. I am the Director of Clinical Services for Aware Recovery Care. We are a 52-week in-home, addiction treatment program. So we actually go into the individual's homes and work with them and their families. So it's very different than an individual going into a facility. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner, so I've been in the field of addiction medicine for about 20 years, and I'm also a person in long-term recovery. So I really liked your definition of who's the expert, so I guess I'm the expert on both sides of this as a person who has sat across from a family who had an intervention for myself, and I've also been, as a professional, been part of that. So I'm very happy to be here to talk to you guys about this really important topic. And it is difficult to tease out, is it mental health, is it substance use disorder? And most of the time, those two things are very intertwined. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the fitness for duty exam, exactly what is that? I really liked what Marko talked about. One thing that you can do on your job sites or in your office at work is to have a conversation with someone right when they get there. Are you ready for the day? I equate it to almost like a medical report. We take report from another medical provider, and I would know immediately if someone was slurring their words or if they were not staying on point, what was wrong with them if they were not able to do that thing. The same thing you could happen in your job site. Also, historically, if an individual is usually on time, they show up, they get their work done, right away when someone starts missing work, not completing their projects, not staying focused, I say absenteeism, those things are really big signs. And it's funny that we often know that something is going on with someone, but as human nature, we kind of don't want to address it. I say address it early and head on. That's the best way to address a problem. So the fitness for duty, you can have different diagnosis after a fitness for duty exam. You can have a fitness for duty with no restrictions. They can go back to work without any restrictions. They can go back with modifications or slight restrictions, or they're unfit for duty. And unfit for duty would be someone who is in active addiction, who's unable to perform their job safely, who would put other people at risk, including themselves. We were talking about that this morning. You know, we have somebody who's on a job site, who's driving a truck or working in construction. I'm not a construction worker, so forgive me. Some of the words you were saying this morning, I was like, I have no idea what those things are. But, you know, you don't want to put anybody at risk, especially your other teams that are working along with those individuals. So that would be somebody who's unfit for duty. And that doesn't mean that they will never be fit for duty, because recovery does happen. And that's one of the things we want to talk about is, when is it appropriate to say this person is no longer to be able to be employed here, or do we want to invest in this person's recovery? One thing I do say oftentimes is we take someone's livelihood away, we take away their license, their ability to work, their chances for recovery goes down greatly. It really does. And I work with practitioners, doctors, nurses who've had their license suspended or taken away. And when you take those things away, just like in your fields, I'm sure, their chance to get better long-term really goes down. So that you can look there to see what can trigger a fitness for duty exam. And if you have a history, or if you're suspecting that a person is using, with the introduction of medical marijuana, you know, we've put the word medical in front of an illicit substance now and think that it's a cure-all for a lot of things. This is causing a great deal of problems in our community, and it's going to get bigger. With the opiate crisis, the first time historically the CDC has now lowered the life expectancies for Americans for the first time ever due to the overdose death and the crisis of the opiates. That's how big a deal this is. That's how big a problem it is. But marijuana is going to be shortly behind it on its coattails, I can tell you. So any of these different things, of course, if there's a threat to an individual or the workplace, you would want to get a fitness for duty exam. I'm going to run out of time.
That's okay.
So the biggest thing we want to do, of course, is prevention early on, and I'm sure some other of our panel is going to talk about this. Doing drug screening early on, and you know, talking about a policy right when somebody is hired here, that we don't just say that we don't tolerate drugs, but this is what we're going to do if they're suspected. This is what we're going to do if you have a positive urine drug screen. This is what we're going to do if any of these things are suspected. Letting people know, having those things out early on when somebody is hired, so that they're aware that that's going to take place. Just going to go through these real quick. So one of the things that we do, and you know, when he asked, what would you, do you know what you would do if you were presented with this problem? It's often like, you know, we take CPR. Many of us are CPR certified, but it's very different to do a CPR on a dummy and to do a live CPR when somebody who dropped dead's right in front of you. Because I can tell you that probably many of you in this room are going to come in contact either personally or professionally with someone who is in active addiction, and you are going to be terrified. It is going to really be like the iceberg. You can see the tip of it, but you can't see what's underneath it. So I really encourage you to reach out to professionals to get the help to get through this, because it will take on a life of its own very, very quickly. So get through treatment here, and then Somebody thinks another person is going to talk a little bit about follow-up care with 12-step meetings, self-care, therapy, primary care. Involve as many people as you possibly can with the person's care. All right, I will pass this along. Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm going to try to walk around for a quick minute. Brody and Associates, we're labor, employment, and benefits lawyers. Lindsay Reinhardt is here. She and I put the program together. Marko, you're gracious enough to call us the adults. I somewhat feel like we're Debbie Downer and Danny Downer here, because there are a lot of very positive things that are being discussed in the room. And the thing that we want to make sure we're doing is make sure you can do it without taking huge risks as an employer. Your intentions are good, but we know that when we are in front of a judge and we say, Judge, we meant to do the right thing, we didn't quite do it, but we meant to, that doesn't usually get us real far. So we want to make sure that the positive things you're hearing this morning are things that you can actually do legally. So here's a laundry list of laws that are up there. You've probably heard of the American with Disabilities Act. That comes up quite a bit if you have people who are addicted to drugs, who have mental issues, okay? Alcohol issues. These can all be covered by this. And it really is laws that are just simply saying you have some obligations not to discriminate, which is a big deal, because sometimes you're trying to do the right thing, which in essence means you might be picking on somebody because you think they have a problem and you're trying to help them. You say you're trying to help them, they say you're picking on them. Are you violating the law? You might. The other side of it is you have duties. You have to help them. Yes, that's what that law says. The drug-free workplace is really a federal law. You're all probably familiar with it, but it's a federal law that's just telling you we're gonna take a position. We want to have a drug-free workplace. There's not a lot of teeth in that one, frankly. Applies to federal contractors. OSHA. There's lots of different ways OSHA is going to be involved, and OSHA does have some teeth. When you talk about the Connecticut Crow, we're talking about, are you discriminating? And who are you discriminating against? And again, the concern we have is your good intent may actually be discriminating against somebody who is disabled because they have the disability or the history of being addicted to drugs. And so we're trying to make sure we don't do that. Connecticut does have drug testing laws, just so you're aware, in case you're not. You can't just willy-nilly go out there and say, I'm going to start drug testing people. Pre-employment, yes. Post-employment, no. So you've got to have specific reasons, and that's limited. We're talking about legalized marijuana. I'm not really sure what that means yet. You guys have your hands full with it. We do know there are some questions that we can answer. So the employee who during lunch is smoking a joint, no, they can't do that, okay? The problem is, what about the employee who gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning, smokes a joint, and comes in at 9? Can they do that? Probably not, but you're getting close. So that's an issue, and we're going to see what happens with that. The white paper that kind of prompted some of this that Connecticut put out, it's a great aspirational tool. We just want to remind all of you, and this is, again, the Dan Downer in me is, that's not law. That's not going to defend you when somebody says, despite your best intentions, you picked on me. Because one of the things we're concerned about is if you say this person just came back from overseas, they were in the Middle East, they have some problems from their military history, well, we're going to help them. And we're going to impose our will on them, and we're going to figure out if they do have a drug addiction, but you actually, or an opioid addiction, or a mental health issue. You do all these things because you're trying to help, but maybe you end up finding out that that person does have a drug addiction, and maybe they end up getting fired for that, and their position is, well, you did to me because I was in the military. What about him? Why didn't you give him the same treatment you gave me? If you had, you would have found out he's a lot worse than me. But you didn't, because you don't know he's in the military. You know I am. You tried to help me, and I got fired, which is not what we're trying to do. So I just think you got to be careful of these things. Best practices. We're going to talk about a clear workplace, drug-free, alcohol-free workplace policy. It makes sense. It's a nice thing to put on the table for your employees. Do you want to have a second chance agreement? For a lot of you, second chance agreements, and somebody even said to me from the panel, second chance agreements are one way to keep workers. You got to keep that in mind. It's hard to get workers. It might be worth it. But then how risky is it to keep the worker? You got to think about that for your business. When you're talking about accommodations, the laws do say you have to help and discriminate in favor of people who are disabled. And that includes mental disabilities, and opioid addiction is one. You may have to discriminate in their favor. Are you ready to do that? I have to take a quick peek to see if I have 8 seconds left. Okay. Interactive process, just something to keep in mind. To the extent you are doing some interventions, you actually have an obligation to sit down with your employees and talk to them if they have a disability, such as an opioid addiction that is in recovery. You have to actually try to help the people. I think the panel is going to say to you, that's a good thing. And as lawyers, we're going to say to you, you got to do that. You got to do that. Open door policy, hopefully that makes sense. In terms of just the considerations, we talked about the last chance agreement, training supervisors. You may hear a lot about that. I have a concern, I will just tell you from a legal standpoint. I don't know that you're going to end up effectively training your supervisors, and I don't want to create monsters, because your supervisors may be half trained on how to identify, and I worry about what that means. Will they make mistakes because they really don't know? You know, you kind of look like you got a drug problem. There she is, she's scratching her nose. I know what that means. And then all of a sudden, I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing. So yeah, they all say that, the allergies. I've heard that.
Standard answer.
But I want to make sure that we're being careful of things like that. So make sure when we're talking about the second chances, how are we going to work on that? How much money do we want to spend? That's a question all of you have to think about. The mental health concerns, very important, but you got to make sure you're not going to affect your business, and you got to balance the two. You got to have the good heart, but the business got to succeed, and you got to make sure you do it legally.
Thanks, Bob.
Beth.
So I'm Beth Dupont. I'm thrilled to be here today to have this discussion with you. I've got some of our safety colleagues with me today, and I'm thrilled that they're here as well because we are all about collaboration. I can tell you as an HR practitioner, excuse me, Marko, as an HR practitioner, this is probably the most complex and complicated it's ever been. And from a construction perspective, it's even more complex and complicated. So we're dealing with federal laws, we're dealing with state laws, we're dealing with non-DOT requirements, we're dealing with DOT requirements. It's very, very confusing. And as I listen to the panel today too, I think about, what are we doing right? Where do we need to continue to sort of test our thinking about what is working and what isn't working? I'm going to go down here as well. And hopefully share with you some good practice and processes that we're doing and things that we're testing as well that maybe aren't working so well. And then, of course, what things are working and how do we make them better as well. I think for me, as an HR practitioner, it is about collaboration. It is about talking with your partners, our safety teams, our superintendents in the field. It's the foremen, it's the PEs, it's the PMs, and it is about open communication. And we can't be afraid to talk about not only our business strategy, who are we, what we're all about. We're trying to build a bridge, we're trying to build a hospital, we're trying to build a school, but also our workforce. And we can't be afraid to use terms like, I think somebody has anxiety or depression. We have to use those words of schizophrenia, bipolar. We can't be afraid to have that sort of that language in our nomenclature. That is part of who we are. It is about workforce development too. I am all about workforce development. We've got talented baby boomers who are sort of on their way out. We've got our generation and our Generation X and our millennials coming up, but there's not as many of them. How do we create a professional, talented, hardworking group of people that will sustain our business, not only for O&G Industries, but for all of us as well? So a couple of things I want to share with you today. So as I already pointed out, we are heavily regulated in terms of the construction field. We have federal requirements and we have our state requirements as well. It is safety sensitive. For example, as an HR practitioner, I had the DOL come in and say, Beth, or I'm asking them to say, I need to have certain jobs on our Hartford project, the Charter Oak Bridge project, to be classified as safety sensitive. DOL, what is it that you need from me to ensure that we can classify masons, carpenters, the tin knockers, whomever they are, that in fact this is safety sensitive? Because at the end of the day, it is about safety on the workplace as well. Does that make sense so far? from my perspective as an HR practitioner, I think sort of bifurcated, bilaterally here. I've got non-union jobs that I'm working with, and I'm working with our union jobs as well. And we talk about a symbiotic relationship with our union partners. It must be a symbiotic relationship. We work with Kyle, we work with our carpenter unions, our mason unions, the Teamsters to figure out, because it is symbiotic. We can't do what we do without a talented workforce. And we all have to work together. So there is no delineation between, O&G and union. It is in fact a partnership, and it has to be that way, right, Kyle?
Absolutely.
Yep. So the other thing for me too is about how do I not only sustain a talented workforce right now, but how do I grow it internally? Who can we, grow and develop internally in the organization? A laborer wants to become, we've got a great laborer out in the field, and now they want to become a carpenter or an electrician or whatever. How do we grow them internally? And then externally, what are the assets outside where we can start, introducing, what we do from a construction perspective, whether it's middle school kids, high school kids, college kids, and then bring them into our workforce as well. We need that. Again, it is all about workforce development. And then, as Kyle and I have talked about, it really is about shared responsibility. Whether we are doing, last chance agreements or, second chance, whatever, it is about shared responsibility in terms of taking care of our workforce. A couple of other slides. We do fit for duty. We do pre-employment physicals, drug screens, background checks. Bob brought up a really good point as an HR practitioner as well. I do think about EEO. I have read those EEO guidelines. I want to make sure that we are not discriminating anyone for any particular reason. I ask these questions all the time. Are we treating this person any differently than anybody else? And if we are, let's talk about it. And why is that? Because it is rife with landmines in terms of, from a legal perspective, are we doing the right thing for the right reason? Is it consistent? Have we looked at our policies, once a year or 2 times a year? Does legal counsel have a say in it, just to make sure that what we're saying, written, and then how we're actually practicing it actually works? Let's see, what else? A couple of other things. For me anyway, and I'm also getting cut off, it's blinking and I'm going to get the hook. So for me too, pardon?
It's a guideline.
Yes. So for me, it is about sort of removing the shame and the stigma. I have to start talking the way I want people to start talking out in the field. So when someone says, I'm not feeling well, tell me about it. What's going on? I'm not afraid to use the terms anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar, whatever it is, because I want my partners out in the field, the foremen, the soups, to feel comfortable to say, Beth, I think I have an issue. I need some help. Mike Ferry, our safety officer, I need some help. And we talk collaboratively all the time about what's happening. So communication is key. Encourage voice, upstream. I want to be able to allow our union folks, our non-union, all of our employees to be able to say, I do have an issue. Or I have a superintendent or foreman or project manager that says, I think I've got an issue. Can we talk about it? Yes, let's talk about it. If you hear something, say something, of course. People will say, am I going to lose my job? Those are the questions that we have almost, I don't want to say on a daily basis, but we certainly have those conversations with folks to say, am I going to lose my job? We need to talk about that. We need to make sure that you're safe. We need to make sure that your teammates are safe on the job. We need to make sure that the public is safe. Think about the traffic pattern issues if you're in construction anyway. From a safety perspective, changing traffic patterns on 91 or 95 and you're doing a construction job, that is perilous at times. You have to be safe. And then of course for me, bottom line, we also talk about no retaliation as well. If someone's got an issue, let's talk about there can be no retaliation going back onto the job. Culture of open communication and mutual respect, absolutely. But we have to model those values, and we have to figure out ways to train and teach those superintendents, those foremen out in the field to get that too. 3, candid but kind communication with accountability. Safety, 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 number 1. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you.
Eric, you're up.
Okay, Eric, I know we've got a lot in common.
Good morning. My name's Eric Daigle. I'm the Vice President of People and Culture for Laz Parking. We're a national provider of parking management services for about 3,000 clients and employ nearly 13,000 employees. So not unlike what you've heard from Beth, we too are in a highly safety sensitive environment as an organization. You know, I think aside from the things you'll hear from Bob about having the right policies and all the legal implications, we as an organization put our people before profits as an organization, and that's our culture. So beyond doing the right thing for our employees, we truly care about, you know, them and their environments, particularly as we work to combat some of the issues that you've heard about earlier in this presentation. We're highly decentralized. We have employees that work single shifts. We have employees that work in remote locations with little oversight from management. So it really is, for us, a challenge because it's very difficult to identify issues proactively in that type of environment. We have a component of our organization that is subject to DOT requirements, which adds an added level of complexity and compliance to what we do and how we combat this issue in the workplace. But at the core of it, you know, we truly are committed to our employees and have gone consistently above and beyond to provide alternative solutions for having them overcome these types of issues or addiction in the workplace, which it many times extends well beyond what we're legally obligated to do as an employer. You know, I think the core of that is creating sort of an open environment, an environment where employees feel comfortable coming forward. I'm sure many of you employ open door policies, but really evaluating what does that look like and what does that feel like. And encouraging that as a means to also come forward, not to be a resource for we don't have the right tools to do our job, but that it extends out to I need help, I'm suffering, I'm battling this addiction, and I need your help. Encourage employees to come forward. We have countless examples of instances where we've been able to proactively mitigate addiction through some of the signs and symptoms, reasonable suspicion, results that you know we obtain through behavior in the workplace. But we've also helped countless employees that have come forward to say, I'm battling this issue and I need assistance and I don't even know where to start. I think you've got to be a little vulnerable with your employees at times, right? Within the context of the law. I think, you know, as HR practitioners, a lot of times we've got to be very consistent and we do things a little differently at Laz, right? Particularly on this issue, because at the core of it, we truly want to help the people. You know, I think one of the components, you know, as we battle, you know, wanting to make sure that we are not putting anybody else at risk by employing people with substance abuse issues or having them in our workplaces is utilizing your EAP beyond, you know, the 3x5 card that you can put in your wallet that says, here's the 800 number you can call, right? EAP services extend well beyond that to management referral programs where you can agree to have, and I'm sure we're going to hear, you know, Tom talk more about this, but where you've got a lot more opportunity to have, you know, make sure that your employee is complying with the terms and conditions of the program that they're seeking treatment for, right? So we encourage that. As an organization, we did implement a second chance program, right? And we had a need to balance both compliance and safety with doing the right thing for our employees. So there are a lot of considerations here. We've talked about it, and I'm running short on time, but you know, there's ADA considerations, right? So that sort of is the basis of it. In the core, there's some law that we're obligated to help and offer reasonable accommodation for employees that are battling these types of issues. There are pre-employment considerations. Again, I encourage the utilization of an EAP as a compliance check-in resource. But our second chance agreement requires an employee that is agreeing to go through some degree of substance abuse counseling or seeking care for addiction, that they're attesting that following completion they will not report to work under any influence of any substances and abuse. So it provides for and creates comfort for us and our clients as a means of attestation that they understand that we're not acquiescing or loosening our drug-free workplace policy. And of course, you've got to be, concerned with, do you have safety-sensitive positions such as a DOT component where, you simply have to look at this in a different way and maybe can't be sort of as focused on second chance and working through and in some cases working in a light duty capacity. DOT is one of those examples, and we have countless others. As Bob said, continuity and consistency of your policies are the most important, right, in maintaining a program like this. Again, you've got leave of absence programs. We encourage you to use those. We certainly do. And many times we extend beyond what would be required by family medical leave and go beyond that to have it extend out to additional leaves of absence on a personal level. And then I think what's most important is recognizing the signs and symptoms. So having strong training programs in your workplace for identification of this, certifying your supervisors and managers on reasonable suspicion testing and training. But I think safety and employee well-being is paramount to every business in this room. And I think the kind of the closing point really is, I think you've got to be nimble and continue to evolve your policies and programs and how you administer this as the laws and regulations continue to change and evolve.
Thank you, Eric.
Turn it over to Tom.
Thank you. So I'm feeling a little pressure here. Nobody told me everybody on the panel was going to be so smart. And there's a ginormous shot clock on the floor here that's blinking in my face already.
Don't worry about it, Tom. It's going to blow up when I talk, so just relax.
So in conclusion, I'll say, I've been trying to decide if I'm going to stick with my slides or go into some other things that I've heard suggested. I get tangential. I'll stick to the slides for a minute. I want to point out that I'm kind of here to say, so what should an employer be thinking about? What steps do you take? I'm not here to tell you all about how cool it is to have an EAP, although if you want to, I'd love to. But there are really two sets of circumstances. And one is employers who are covered under DOT regulations, federal regulations that say if you have certain types of employees, you must do the following. And if one of your employees fails a test, you must do the following or that person can no longer legally work. And I'm not going to get into all the details of it, but it's often referred to as a SAP program. And that's not just me being funny. That's Substance Abuse Professional Program, where the employee who tests positive must meet with somebody who's certified by the feds to run them through a program. It usually takes about a month. They don't do the training or the education, but they prescribe it. You have to go back and you report to the SAP that I've completed the requirements, and then you're eligible to go back to work legally. Then you've got everybody else who isn't covered under the federal mandated safety-sensitive legislation. So now you've got room to work. You talk to your attorneys, you talk to your union, you talk to people, and you say, so we've got this person, and this is what's happening. What do we want to do with this person? And I think the best advice I've heard so far is make sure whatever you do, it's consistent. You don't want supervisors in one department handling substance abuse issues one way and people in another department handling it another way. But you do want it handled. What you don't want, Deb said something I think I would offer an alternative point of view. I get people that call me up, you're my EAP, we've got this guy. Here's the question. We think we have someone who's showing up drunk. How can we tell, and what should we do? My first answer is don't say drunk. We have someone who may be impaired in the workplace. How can we tell, and what should we do? How can we tell? It depends on what your policies are, depends on your workplace and what testing might be available to you. But I had a bank that wouldn't confront a teller who was showing up impaired every day. She was drunk. And it was obvious to everybody who came in the bank. They didn't want to own it. You know, if we acknowledge it, we own it. And it took me a while to explain to them and convince them that there's a liability issue associated with this that sort of overweighs the ADA concerns. So they said, okay, we'll send her to you and maybe you can help her. And in fact, we did help her. But the way they sent her to us was this. The VP of HR said to the branch manager, tell her this. And the branch manager said to the head teller, tell her this. And the head teller went up and said, we think you're an alcoholic and you have to go to the EAP now. Which is why I keep gin on my side table over here. Obviously, that's not what HR folks, that's not what HR would have had said. I also get people to come up and say, we have an employee who's bipolar, we have an employee who's got depression. And I say, how do you know? Well, she's certainly subject to mood swings and she seems very sad. And I would say, don't diagnose. We had one that came to us with a letter that said this guy must get 3 sessions, where that was a 3-session model, must get 3 sessions of anger management. So he showed up, and we put him in with one of the therapists, and the therapist comes out an hour later and says, sure, anger, yes. Substance abuse issues, for sure, we need to address that first. Well, that was a problem, because the employee had not agreed, the union had not agreed, and management didn't mandate substance abuse treatment. They mandated anger management. So you can see why it's better. And some of the folks out there that we work with, they're licensed therapists and they're running programs and they are able to diagnose. Even those employers shouldn't diagnose. You should leave that to somebody else. I'm just moving through what else I had to say. People often say to me, so how do I approach this person? What do I say to him? Oh man, I'm already done. What do I say to him? I'd start with, we value you as an employee. Hopefully that's true. We value you as an employee. However, this is a performance matter and this behavior needs to change. You cannot show up impaired in the workplace. Just because you've been referred to the EAP doesn't give you license to show up impaired. Okay? You still have to show up straight. The behavior has to change. The EAP can likely help you with that if that's the way you want to go. I wouldn't pry into the person's personal problems too much. I have people that call me up and say, she's on an antipsychotic, but I think the dosage is too low. This is HR talking. You know, shut up. You don't even need to know that. You don't want to know that. Let us work with people on that respect. And I get people that call up and talking about treatment. And one of my slides here is, what does treatment look like? Well, what do you expect when you say to an employee, we're concerned about an issue with you? Usually they say, well, thank you for your concern. I'm very glad you brought this to my attention. Had I realized it was a problem here in the workplace, this would have never happened. Not so much. I haven't had a drink since 1985. Just coincidentally, I'm an EAP guy now, really. But I can tell you that for 2 years, I didn't have a problem. My wife had a problem. If she would just shut up, there would be no problem. I'm just saying.
Okay.
If somebody is going to go get help, it will look like one of these things. Inpatient is obviously, you're there, it's residential. Partial hospitalization is in and out, mostly on a daily basis, and then outpatient. My point is, depending on the level of substance abuse issue, if it's the substance abuse issue, it's important to note that the EAP doesn't prescribe, the employer doesn't prescribe, the treatment program assesses and determines the appropriate level of treatment and care. And when you call me up and say, we got this guy and we want him to go inpatient, I can't promise you that's what's going to happen. Maybe that's what's going to happen. If your guy shows up at the treatment program and denies there's a problem, he's going to get sent home because the beds are available to people who actually want help. So it's hard for me to tell you what's going to happen. I have another slide? No.
If I could
So-
just jump in here.
Sure.
One of the things I wanted to say, what's so important that you said, there are many medical issues that look exactly like intoxication. So diabetes, traumatic brain injury, could be early onset, Alzheimer's. There's other things that look like it. So if someone shows up and they appear impaired, they need medical attention to rule out. It could be something, like I said, like a traumatic brain injury, and they need medical attention right away. So just not assume, hey, they're intoxicated, go home and sleep it off, because that could be a death sentence for someone who is struggling with a medical issue. We always rule out medical organic issues before we turn it to it's an impaired individual.
I saw a drunk thrown out of a building one time by security because he was slurring his speech and he was stumbling and he smelled like he'd been drinking wine. And it turns out it was a guy in a diabetic emergency.
Exactly, diabetes. So it looks and sounds and smells exactly like that. Also lithium toxicity, the same thing. I actually, as an emergency room practitioner, I had an individual that came in. She had a traumatic brain injury. She was put in the hall because they thought she was intoxicated. If it wasn't for one of our lab techs that went and drew her blood, said she doesn't smell like alcohol, this woman would have died in the hall in a hospital.
Good to go?
Rock on, Kyle.
All right. Well, good morning. My name's Kyle Zimmer. Marko didn't introduce me before, so I'll introduce myself.
Good morning, Kyle. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome, Marko. I want to start with my usual disclaimer. I apologize for any bad words that might slip out, but I get very passionate about this. And the reason why I get passionate about this is each and every one of you in this room has the ability to save somebody's life that's struggling in crisis. Now, we've been going, and this whole presentation is focused around opioids, right, and addiction. I take it one step further. I call it lifestyle issues. Because if you're talking to your workforce and you say, today we're going to talk about the opioid crisis, and if they don't have or haven't been touched by it, they're going to turn it off. They said, we don't have that problem. Well, they do. They have a lifestyle issue. Lifestyle issues are addiction, suicide prevention, behavioral health, like Marko laid it out so good before. So what we need to do is engage your employees, union members, coworkers, family members on how to deal with this crisis. I'm in construction, we build bridges. This is what I want to talk about, that center span of the bridge. You have EAPs, you have treatment. They are absolutely necessary in any program to provide the professional level of care that's needed. We have a healthy lifestyle. How do you get there? You put a span in the middle so people can walk across that span if they're struggling with any crisis in their life to get to the help that they need. And that's where peer people help. How many of you have ever talked to your employees, family members about a personal issue in the workplace? Anybody? Hands go up. You're a peer counselor, whether you know it or not. What you're doing is you're compassionately listening. You're coming up with a good pathway to get them the professional help they need. Even though I sleep at Holiday Inns quite frequently, I am not a professional counselor. Okay, remember that. But what you can do is you can listen and you can relate what you know about these issues to them so they can get help. And how do you do that? Well, I've got an example for you. How many here have heard of the Focus 4 from your OSHA training? Okay, what's the Focus 4? The Focus 4 is falls, caught in between, electrocution, and struck by. And how many deaths a year do they account for in industry and construction? We all know, right? A couple of thousand? Let's add the fifth focus to that. You throw in addiction, suicide, and behavioral health issues, those numbers go up exponentially. Now, I know we have representatives from OSHA here today. I have been told by our general president, James Callahan of the International Union of Operating Engineers, he will pick up all my legal costs if OSHA takes exception with this slide. So any copyright infringement, take it up with Jim.
Kyle, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
You know, one number that sticks out in my brain is that I believe it was 2016, it was nearly 1,000 employees died in construction as a result of the Focus 4. In the same year, 2016, over 4,400 construction workers took their own lives. So I think that's pretty much what Kyle's going to is, are we focusing on the right things? Or should we, maybe we're not focused on the wrong things by any stretch of the imagination, but is there somewhere else that we really need to be looking?
And that comes to culture change. In the late 70s, we had a culture change in safety in the construction industry when we tried to get people to wear hard hats, eyeglasses, high-vis vest, right? There was so much resistance to that. But we changed the culture, and now it's an everyday thing where they wear it. This is the culture change that has to happen now. We need to start talking about these issues on the job site and getting the people help. We talked about statistics before, substance abuse and presenteeism, impact on safety. I'm not going to go through this, but we all touched on it. You may not be the person struggling on the job site or in the factory floor, but your wife, your son, your daughter, or a close friend might be. And you've been up till 2 o'clock in the morning wondering what the hell the kids have been doing, where your wife is, where your husband is, whatever the scenario. And are you being the best that you can be for your employer? That's presenteeism. So what works? Workplace peers work. Because we spend more time, especially in the construction industry, with our coworkers than we do with our family sometimes. And we have a challenge in our construction world where we have a lot of people traveling from job site to job site and they're away from their home environment. So they're looking for pathways to get the help that they need. So how do you develop workplace peers? Peers can be someone who has been successful in recovery or who has helped others experience in similar situations, veterans, people that have experienced PTSD. Critical incidents on job sites are a big priority that we need to do intervention on. So peer people are the ones that are trained in those disciplines to get people the pathway to help. Peers can be family members of those who have suffered through experiences and are able to help others. One thing that we do when we develop peers in our international union is we vet them. We ask them questions and get some personal experiences from their past so that we can align them with the people that they need to talk to. Peers may not have any personal connection to substance abuse, suicide, or behavioral health. They just may be willing to help. And the training is there to guide them, train them up so they can do it correctly. The one big thing about peers, okay, I told you they're not licensed clinicians or anything like that. We leave that to the professional. But the 3 R's, and we've developed the 3 R's so that they can keep their peer responsibility and focus. And that is recognize, react, and recommend. Recognize the signs and symptoms of problem behaviors in whatever discipline we're talking about. Just get that basic knowledge down so they're prepared to start those conversations that need to be started. Reacting to the behaviors and initiating that conversation. Be a compassionate listener. Be a good communicator. Those are paramount to good peer programs. And then recommend the person to another level of care. To Shelley's point before with treatment, I remember when I got involved with the peer concept and getting people into treatment for addiction. The standard of care was what? You got to go away for 30 days. Well, you know what? If I'm in crisis, if I'm struggling with addiction, the last thing I want to do is pack my bags and go to a strange place. And people thought that was the end all to treatment. I am so happy the treatment modalities have evolved throughout the years so that we can have conversations, offer options, and let them find their own successful way to recovery. Because we don't want to be doing this over and over and over again. The HR people in this room will tell you the cost of treatment is phenomenal. It's through the roof. The insurance companies are assholes, to be perfectly honest with you, in a lot of cases, in getting people into effective, good treatment. And it pisses me off that they haven't changed yet, but we're going to make a change. We're going to start making that change in the peer communities. We've been talking collectively on how to do that. So, you know, look for different treatment options. You don't need to become experts, but you need to have that base knowledge. So if you're talking to somebody who's struggling, you say, you know, maybe you really should talk to somebody. Well, who do I talk to? Have your network, have your relationships established so you can start that conversation.
Thanks, Kyle.
You're up.
Marko, could I just
Absolutely.
To piggyback on the
Sure.
peer program thing, I work with a lot of police and fire people. That's where I run into most peer programs. And it really makes a huge difference. If I come in with people like me, we're total strangers, we're pointy-headed counselors, but somebody else in this room understands what it's like to pull a car over at 2 o'clock in the morning and say license and registration. Or in your case, maybe somebody else understands what it's like to work 30 feet in the air on a scaffold all day. They don't think that's me. I was at a thing one time with the woman who runs a state police peer program, and she said to a group of state troopers, "I'm not a counselor, I'm just a trooper." And when she got all done, I got up and introduced myself and said, "I'm not a trooper, I'm just a counselor." I think it's important to understand the roles that peers can play.
Thanks.
I want
Go
to
ahead, Bob.
piggyback on another angle of this. Peers, very effective. I have no issue with it. The lawyer in me, the Danny Downer in me says, let's be smart. Let's make sure the peers do know what they're doing. And the other side of it is, I know you hate this, but are we documenting it? Because one of my questions is, I've been helping you, there's no documentation, and then something terrible happens. Company, why didn't you do anything? Well, I did. What'd you do? Well, I don't have any paperwork, but trust me, I did. Well, that's not a defense. So I want to make sure when we do these peers, one, I want to make sure that we're careful that they are qualified. They're not clinicians. That's not the point. I understand. But they got to have some guidance. And the other thing is, as a management team, can I back up that I am doing something because this gentleman does have a problem and I'm trying to help him with peer, but I want to be able to prove that I've done that.
So here's a suggestion. Maybe we should have another training session where we can talk about development of peer counselors and the legality of it.
Absolutely.
And make it a 2-day presentation. I just want to throw that out.
Definitely. Majority of our staff are individuals that are life experience. So with peers, the other piece is that they have constant supervision and that they're being taken care of as well, because often they're face to face with very difficult situations and may need the support and supervision to make sure that they're taking care of themselves.
The other thing that's true is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. If you're thinking about a peer program, somebody else already has one.
Yep.
And it's probably well documented what the curriculum for training ought to look like, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
So don't start with a blank piece of paper.
Yeah, give me a call. We just, our international just partnered with NADAC, developed a 4-day certificate program that we run in our training program down in Texas. We had our inaugural class of 39 people from around the country that were interested in taking it, and we have over 120 signed up on a waiting list for, future classes, which are happening in August, November, and then into next year. So, I guess don't be afraid to approach the subject of putting in peer people in your workplace, because there are a lot of people that are out there that, again, may be in recovery, may just want to help people that don't have that avenue. So it has to start from the top. The upper management's got to give the okay to do these programs. To your point, put them in place correctly. There are guidelines. There's documented guidelines, accepted guidelines. Firefighters, machinists have programs, flight attendants, operating engineers. We all have programs, and we all shared our experiences to develop those. So reach out, and we can point in the right direction.
Kyle, I just want to add one other thing, which I think is really important. As an HR practitioner, I want to bring it all the way back over here. And our mantra in human resources at ONG is superlative execution of the basics. We want to make sure that our infrastructure, the basics of what we do from an HR perspective, are solid ground. They are legally compliant. They are kind and compassionate, and it is about sort of the success of our organization as well. And part of that, though, is in terms of those sort of the execution of the basics, is teaching our leaders out in the field to be able to say, you know what, Beth, I think that there's an issue. And so my question is, so we're not diagnosing. What's the behavior? What's going on in terms of job performance? So those very basic, simple things first, to be able to make sure that our leaders out in the field are in fact comfortable, not only calling me or somebody else or our safety team or whatever. Say, I think there's a performance issue, because that's what I ask. How is it impacting the job? What's going on? Are they late? Are they whatever? So basic execution of the basics.
And that's the fabulous legal defense, because it's not you're an alcoholic, you're a drunk, you're a whatever. It's you're not
Performance.
performing at the job.
Right.
And I have a right as your employer to make sure you perform at the job.
Right.
I may have a guess as to why you're not, but that's really irrelevant. The point is you're not. We got to fix it. And then the fix gets into all this stuff where you
Right.
can maybe use this stuff to fix it. But your point isn't I'm going to fix you. Really, the legal point is I got a job to do. I'm going to make sure we do our job right, safely, and all those other things. And you're not complying with that.
Right.
So we got to get you to. And the stuff that we're talking about is how you're going to get them there.
We've actually had members with O&G, our union members, a crane operator nodded out from opioid use, holding a load over I-95 in New Haven at 3 o'clock in the morning. The superintendent of the job pulled him out of the crane and said, "What's going on here?" And, you know, he admitted to a problem. They got him to us at the union. I had an intervention with the gentleman. We got him into treatment. We got him into long-term aftercare program and support systems. And this weekend, he is celebrating his 5th year of long-term recovery. He's back at that job, a stellar employee with O&G. He shares his story with everybody. So the success stories are out there. Utilize them, because somebody that's suffering from addiction, 9 out of 10 times they don't want to be that person, right? Am I correct? They don't want to be that person. But their way of thinking is so skewed that they don't know the way out. We need to provide that clarity so that they can get those pathways to help. And then, you know what? One of the things that I always say to somebody that I'm dealing with in the field is, listen, we understand you have a problem. I get it. If you do the right thing and commit to this, I'll do the right thing to protect you and get you back to work. You know, so it's let's make a deal. And, you know, if they're resisting and they don't want to go to a certain type of treatment modality, okay, we'll try it your way. But if it doesn't work, let's try it my way. So have those conversations. Talk to them as a human being, as a person. And you will be so impressed with the results that you get. And it's not a heavy lift at all. It's just doing it.
Beth, did you
I
have?
just have one more thing to add, and that is a wonderful success story, and I hope that we'll have many, many more. On the other hand, we have to also be careful about, so there's sort of this two-way of thinking. We want to make sure that as people are leaving our organization for help, that we're sharing privately to the extent that we can. This is a culture shift now, that sometimes people are going to leave the organization. They need to do what they've got to do because it is about safety in our organization, paramount. We also have to be really, really concerned about the folks in terms from employee optics. So as we're re-entering those folks as well who have gone out for help, to make sure that there is a strong culture of support, that there aren't any concerns about ongoing safety issues. So it's sort of the exit of folks who are leaving. Culturally, how do they manage that as a workforce? But then also as folks are re-entering into our workforce from the current workforce experience, what are they thinking? What are their concerns about, to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms about safety, kind, compassion in our workforce. And candidly, talented craftspeople, out in the field.
Awesome, thank you. I have a few closing comments to make. One is that Tom referred to SAP programs, and we also, I think most of us talked about supervisory training for recognition of challenges. I would suggest to you that if you don't have a program in place already for supervisory training, the DOT has some great guidelines. And if you can look at those guidelines, the SAP guidelines, and their training programs that are available online, they're great resources as long as you can extrapolate the information from those DOT-specific resources, put your leadership personnel, your managers, your supervisors, and whatnot through a DOT class. It's a shortcut to success for awareness. I will tell you also that, from the perspective of resources, there are resources listed at the end of the program. I think they're in your handouts. One of the things that I'm doing in July is there's a program called Mental Health First Aid, which is a day-long program. It's offered through Hartford Hospital and the Institute for Living. I think it's a Saturday in July. certainly recommend that as something. I'm not a trained professional, I'm not a counselor. I just have a concern and a love and a need to reach out and do more. So I'm hoping that this mental health first aid class will be one way to empower me and enable me to be able to follow through with my employees and our subcontractors. We saw earlier this slide, and I think the question is, how well prepared do you think your organization is in dealing with, and it says opioid use. Let me change that to mental health overall. And the answer was 53% said somewhat well prepared, and I think we established that that number is probably a little skewed. So my suggestion is that we get a better handle on our answer to somewhat well prepared. Let's ask ourselves the really hard questions. Let's reduce the margin for error in these numbers and make these real numbers. Ask yourselves, what are you prepared to do? When are you prepared to do it? And obviously, I think it's going to take a team to be able to build the programs that you need. And that's where CBIA comes in. That's where, as Kyle indicated, you can reach out to any one of us. Kyle is a diehard, dyed-in-the-wool union guy. But when it comes to care, it doesn't matter. Get his card, please, union or non-union. Get his card, call him, talk to him, and he will help you. A couple of quick notes to finish. Stopping and thinking about what we're doing, thinking about the people that are in our workplaces, think about the people that we work alongside, not only as coworkers, but think about their families and how our safety programs are designed to make sure that everybody goes home safely at the end of the day. We have to recognize that our employees are human beings, and we need to treat them as such. We need to recognize the fact that not only should they be able to go home with all of their parts and pieces, but they should be able to go home with all their parts and pieces. They should be able to go home feeling safe, and feeling safe is not just necessarily physical safety. We can, if we focus on this, we can make change. I started a website a couple of years ago called Stop, Think, Prevent, with the concept being basically it was about fall prevention, because we did our fall protection stand down a couple of years ago with OSHA's Safety Week, and then the week later there was a fall at Hartford Hospital. A guy fell 65 feet off the hospital, and that just freaked me out. I said, we've got to do something about this. We have Safety Week, and this is Mental Health Awareness Month, by the way. We have Safety Week, we have Mental Health Awareness Month, et cetera. And what are we going to do next week? What are we going to do next month? So I started this program, and the logo is the falling man, as I refer to him. And I've gotten some guff on that because it's kind of a negative perspective. It's the falling man. So I thought, what do we do? How do we change our perspective? And I turned the logo around and made it hand up, stop, reaching out to help. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to think about where we are. How many of you have fall exposures in the workplace? Everybody, right? How many of you have fall prevention plans, guardrails, hole covers, tie-off, all of that kind of stuff? Excellent. How many of you have fall response plans? Not as many hands. This is the same issue. We have mental health issues in the workplace. We need to have a mental health response plan. We need to be prepared. We need to take control. We need to take charge. Kyle, last slide. It's on you, bud.
All right. Each one of us in this room is a professional in one way or the other. We all have legacies to leave. We all want to leave a legacy in our life and what we do in our work life, in our professional life, in our family lives. This is one issue that you can take on and make a difference, whether you realize it or not. You never know when it's going to hit you. It may be tonight, maybe tomorrow, you never know. Maybe next week, next month, next year, but you don't know. When I first started on this journey to promote the pure concept in the trade unions, I was with the president of the North American Building Trade, Sean McGarvey, and he was very, very uncomfortable about this situation and the topic of opioid addiction in construction. And I was sitting in a room with him with 14 presidents of the building trade unions, academic people and researchers, and they all kept going around the issue. They kept going around the issue. They kept going around the issue. We don't need any more statistics. We don't need any more research. We know what the problem is. And I just looked at Sean and I said, Sean, it's time to get uncomfortable about it. It's time to get comfortable with an uncomfortable topic. So it's time to get uncomfortable and start the conversations. Start building the pathways. Start reaching out to the professionals in the industry that know the answers. Talk about it, leave your legacy. Make a mark on this issue, please. Because you know what? Last week I lost a 52-year-old retired firefighter who decided to take his life by jumping off a bridge in Manchester, Connecticut at rush hour. And it just shook me to the core again that somebody didn't see the signs. It's happening way too much. So please, get uncomfortable. Thank you.
You guys have been great. Thank you so much for your input over the past month and a half or so as we put this program together. I really appreciate your help. I appreciate the resources that your employers have allowed you to be here and whatnot. It's been a fabulous program. Please grab cards. I've got some cards up front here. Kyle, I'm sure you have cards. Anybody else? And you can reach out through our handout materials as well and get in touch with us. Thank you.
I'd like to very much thank the panelists and Marko. Job well done. As Bob pointed out,